we had a shelf, and it had baking powder, and it had cornstarch on that shelf. And somehow or other, instead of taking the cornstarch down to thicken my lemons for the lemon pie, I took the baking powder. And when I put that baking powder in there to thicken it, it boiled all over. And I said, "Mom, there's something wrong. It's boiling over." And she said, "Girl, what did you do? You must have taken the baking powder. What did you do?" Yeah, that's what I did. I was just a little kid yet. Another thing we kids did, Mr. Martin, that's the man that owned that greenhouse, he would, these bachelor buttons, I don't know if you know what a bachelor button is. They're blue, they're just a wildflower. They're blue, some are pink and some are white. And they got a little center, just a little single flower. And we would go out there and we'd have to pick and put 26 in a bunch. So Mother would go out with us and we kids would pick them, and then she would count them so we sure have the right number in it, and tie a rubber band around them and put them in a big galvanized wash tub with water. And then Dad would come along with his sled and the horse and put that tub on there and drag it down to the greenhouse. And Mr. Martin would take them into Portland, and I guess he made a lot of money on them. You can eat the green tops of them when they're right young and tender, and you just cook your beets, and you scrub them up, and then cook them in there with the skin on them, because if you peel them, they bleed too much. And you cook them with the skin on, and after they're cooked through, then you let them cool off, and you peel that skin off. And then now there's a red beet, and this year I got the red beet seed, and I got a beet seed that is a red and white stripe. And when I cooked that, it turned kind of an ashen gray, and it didn't look good, but they're sweet and taste real good. But the red beet, they just stay nice and red. And then you just peel them and chop them up any way you want them, dice them up, and put a little butter and pepper and salt on them. They're good that way. It's a lot different in my days than what it is now, but I think that in our days we had better times than they are now. Their kids are never satisfied now. And it took very little for us kids to be satisfied. When Christmas would come, we didn't get a whole big bunch of expensive stuff, but they never had that. We'd get maybe one nice toy, and we'd get a new dress, or boys would get a new overalls or something. And for we'd get school things, pencils and papers and tablets, and maybe a storybook. And then we'd get candy and oranges and walnuts, which we didn't raise in those days. Folks had to buy them, and that would come at Christmas time. But now the kids they have that every day, and they don't think anything of it. And then they don't want this. They rather have don't want walnuts. They want peanuts. And if you don't have peanuts for them, then they're mad. Well, you know, we were happy with whatever they gave us because we liked it, because we weren't spoiled. And you can take these kids now, like my son there and his wife, they're taking care of their grandchild. So there was no way out for me, and I thought, well, if you're going to get married, you just have to put up with it. So I did. Sometimes he'd get my goat. When they'd butcher, we'd butcher 2 hogs every year, and we'd make our own ham, smoke them and everything. But he'd always wanted to take the blood and make blood sausage. That's one thing, my folks never made blood sausage. And liver sausage. They would make liver sausage, but not that blood. And so Grandpa would take a big bowl and go out there, and they'd stab the hogs and bring that blood in, and he was all bloody. The bowl was all dripping, and he'd come in and walk through the kitchen, go to the sink with that bloody stuff. But I couldn't say anything, you know. I was living with him. So when he'd get through, I don't know what they did with the stuff. They threw flour in it, I think. And then I had to make bags for him. I'd take white cloth and make bags about so big around, and then we'd pour that blood thickened with that flour in those bags and tie it shut at the top, because I had to sew the sides and sew the bottom shut, and just had it tight. And then they'd put them in a boiler of boiling water, and they'd drop to the bottom. But when it was cooked, they'd raise to the top, and then they'd take that blood sausage out of there. Then I had to take it the next day and slice it and fry it for breakfast. And he'd get so mad at me because I wouldn't taste it. I thought to myself, you better be glad that I'm frying this for you, but I will never taste it. But he didn't like that idea, that I wouldn't taste it even. But that was blood sausage, and who's going to eat blood? They said, well, you eat blood when you eat steak and all that. And I said, yeah, but just take blood. No, it didn't go with me. I never did until after I was married. And Henry's dad would see his wife had cancer, and she always wanted chicken broth. And so when the chicken get low, he'd say, Minna, is the chicken about gone? I said, yes. He says, I get one tonight. Well, when he come home from work at night, he'd chop the head off that chicken and had feathers from one end of the house to the other. He'd bring it in and do that all. I would never do that in the house. I would do that outside, you know. And so I never did chop a head off. But when he did that, and Minna, we need a chicken tonight, I'll get another chicken then. I went out there and I got a chicken myself and I chopped his head off. You know, someone said, how could you do it? And I said, well, when you get a mess in the house like that all the time, I said, it's a lot easier to chop a head off a chicken. I said, I just never thought of what I was doing. I just hold it with the wings and by the feet, hold those four things together so they couldn't run and couldn't flap and hit me, you know. And then I took a little hatchet and I laid its head on a brick and I, not thinking it's a chicken or anything, I just chop its head off. So when Grandpa come home at night, I said, well, I got the chicken all dressed out. Oh, Minnie, did you do that? Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I said, I didn't know I could either, but I learned how. So after that, Minnie always chopped the heads off and saved that mess in the house. We didn't used to have sweet corn when I was a kid. They used to take the corn, regular cow corn, we called it. And we use that. Now that's not sweet, but we didn't know the difference because we never had sweet corn. And finally we heard of sweet corn. So Dad says, well, we better plant some sweet corn and see what that's like. Man, after we had sweet corn, we didn't want cow corn anymore. But that cow corn would be long ears like that and big round, and they were very good. But we didn't know about the sweetness of the sweet corn. We'd go out there and fish, but we didn't get anything. Little minnows or crawfish. There was a lot of those little crawfish there. Be regular little pits where they had their home, I guess. And we'd get them, but my mother wouldn't cook them all whole. The boys had to kill them, and then they'd take the claws and cook just the claws. But she said, no, I will never put those live fish in boiling water, or those live craw. That was mean to throw them in there. A lot of people said, well, they're dead, why do you throw them in there? Just imagine your body going into a pit of hot water, boiling water. You got to feel that first fall in there. Mother wouldn't stand for that. So we would eat the claws. So, oh, we kids have a feast. The neighbor kids would come. We'd go catch a big bucket full of those things, bring them home, and the boys would hit them on the head, I guess. I don't know how they killed them. And anyway, they'd take those claws then, and the mother would cook them with a little spice. And then we'd all get outside with a brick and a hammer, and we'd all crack claws, and we'd eat crawfish claws. My dad never would eat rabbit, and we kids just loved rabbit. We raised rabbits there. Brother George, he raised so many of them there. He always had a place in Forest Grove, a butcher shop would always buy them from him. And he'd dress them out and take them down there. And if he got too many ahead, you know, rabbits just multiplied so fast, well, then we'd have rabbit. My dad wouldn't eat rabbit. So one day we didn't say anything we was going to have rabbit, and he thought it was chicken. And Mom said, don't you tell him, because he knows he eat rabbit. And finally, after dinner, he said, that was funny bones for that chicken. Different shaped bones, you know. And he noticed that finally. Nobody wanted to say, boy, Grandpa or Dad, you eat rabbit. But it tastes real good. Did you ever eat rabbit? And he got mad at me one day because he got a silver gray and he said, Minnie, he always called me Minne, because he's German, you know, he'd say Minne. Minne, I brought home some good meat today. And I said, what did you bring home? He says, a silver gray. He said, you fix that. That is so good, you will like it. And I said, no, Grandpa, I don't think I want that squirrel. Well, I'll dress it out, he said, and you fix it. So I did. I fried it brown, and then I roasted it and put a little dressing with it. And I put it on the table, and oh, that animal, you know. And Grandpa took some, and my husband took some. And when it come to me, I passed it by, and he said, Minna, aren't you going to eat some of that? And I said, no, Grandpa. You like it so well, you better eat it. I just can't chew it. I can't go it. I never ate any squirrel. But I guess they're all right. It smelled good. It looked good. I've got spinach, and I've got carrots, I've got beets, and I've got mustard greens, and I've got Swiss chard, I've got watermelons, cantaloupe, corn, beans, potatoes. And I did plant onions before, but the gophers eat the onions and eat my garlic, which they never did that before. Last year they eat all my onions that I planted, and I see a garlic stem just wiggling like that one day, and I thought, how come that stem's wiggling around out there? It was just the one that came up volunteering, you know, but it's just funny when there's not a breeze, you know, and see that thing wiggling, and I watched it, and it would just wiggle, wiggle. Finally I took a hold of the thing, and there was no garlic on the bottom anymore. They had to chew it off. I don't remember anything about garlic. I don't know when I first got initiated into garlic, but I like garlic, and now it seems like it's the thing of the day. Everybody has garlic. I raise it myself. I've got the small kind, and I have what they call the elephant ear, the big ones. But I like the smaller ones. They're stronger, and you don't have to, they don't get so mushy like the big ones do, the elephant ears. So that was money for us. And then another thing, my brother would catch gophers and moles from the neighbor. And at that time, it was a bounty on them. The moles, you could cut the snoot off of them and dry them, put them on a board, he'd dry them. And the gophers, you cut the pelt, a 3-corner pelt over their eye, you know, from their eyes down to the nose, so you could see it was a pelt of a gopher. And they pinned that on a board and put it in the sunshine so it would dry out. And so then, because we didn't go to Hillsborough that often, had to take it to the courthouse where they collected those things. And they get 10 cents a snout or a pelt. But we'd get a day off at school. We didn't get as many as they do nowadays. But when we'd get a day off, Mother would put that day aside to bake cookies. And we'd make cookies. We kids always had cookies there. Mother always had cookies for us. And we had ginger snaps, sugar cookies, and oatmeal cookies. That was our main cookies. But we'd bake cookies all day, and we'd have nothing like having 4 big cans of cookies like this, put in the fruit room with a tight lid on. So we always had cookies. We had cookies even for breakfast in the morning. If we didn't have cookies, we'd have spice cake or some kind of a loaf cake, not a layer cake, with icing on, just a plain cake. And so that's the way we were brought up. That's the way the Hollanders did it, and that's the way my mom and dad were brought up. So when I went to work up on the hill there, I thought, well, I don't know how these people eat. I don't know them. I didn't know them from any. So I thought, well, I'll put some cookies on. I put cookies on the table. Nobody touched them. Just Henry and his dad and myself. His mother was in bed because she had cancer, and I didn't bring her any cookies because she was only certain things she could have. So the next morning, I thought, well, I guess I'll put them on once more. Nobody touched them. Never had another cookie on the table, and I never put any cake on for breakfast either. But the other meals, they would eat it, but not for breakfast. That's an old Holland thing, I think, is to have cookies and cake for breakfast. We had a big farmhouse. There must have been around 10, 12 rooms, a lot of bedrooms there. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. No, 4 upstairs and 3 downstairs. Mother and Dad's room, and then we had another bedroom with 2 smaller beds in for the smaller youngsters. And usually a crib standing in Mother's room yet too. And then we had a barn. Oh, I would say that was distance of this barn here, away from the house, but we'd go out to the back door. And my dad always wore wooden shoes to go to the barn because leather shoes would soak up any moisture out in the barn, where his wooden shoes wouldn't do that. And then when he come to the door, he'd step out of his wooden shoes and come in the house on his sock feet, which kept the house clean too. A lot of people didn't do that. But my mother said, I'm sure glad his folks raised him that way, because she said, I know people that just come right in with their dirty shoes and have the floor all dirty. But then our garden was, and we had a chicken house, and our garden was right there, and we kids all had to help with the garden, keep the weeds out. And we'd go out and pick beans, whatever Mother wanted anything. Maybe the potatoes were just getting ripe, getting ready to dig. Weren't ready all the way, but we'd go and dig some early potatoes, so we'd have potatoes to eat at noon. They didn't go out and buy them, because we had plenty of them planted, and as long as there was potatoes there, well, we got potatoes. And new potatoes were better anyway than go buying them. That man of mine would eat anything, and he liked it. I'd have no trouble with him. And even his dad was that way. But we got squirrels now, and they can eat all the lettuce off. And you're not supposed to kill a squirrel. You're not supposed to use any cinch traps anymore or anything. But I killed a squirrel. And I don't have any more lettuce disappearing. But they had to eat it clear down to the root, you know. But if you water it good, it'll start coming up again. So mine got a little bit edge of green on now. But there's a lot of squirrels here. Richard got 58 up there in that orchard here one day. The house was dirty, and they had a lot of flies. In those years, people used to have so many flies. I know we did at home, but we had cows there, but they only had 3 cows on the hill there, and that barn was far enough away. And then his sister had a bulldog, and that dog would claw at the screen door till he had a hole in it, and he'd crawl through there and come in the house. Well, at evening, if the door was open, it was hot, well, the flies would come in that way. And at night, it's just black up against where the pipe went through the wall from the stove, and those flies would come in. It was warm there, and that was all specked with flies. Well, you just take your heads of cabbage and clean them up and take all the bad leaves off, and you cut them in half and cut the core out, and then we have a slicer, like a big grater. It's a big one, so your head of cabbage will fit on it, and then you just have a board that goes on top, and it slides down. This board is about this long, and then there's 3 knives there, and you slide them over those 3 knives, and you have a pan underneath will catch the cabbage all shredded. Then you take that shredded cabbage and put it in a crock, and then you have salt and sugar, a little bit of sugar with it, and you sprinkle it over it. When you get about that 5-6 inches in your crock, then you sprinkle a handful of this. It's all weighed out by the pound, so much cabbage and so much seasoning. And then you sprinkle it on and press it down, and then you go ahead and shred some more, put another layer on, put some more salt on, nothing to it. And you know, just keep pressing it down. Pretty soon the juice comes up. That salt takes juice out of that cabbage. And when you get your crock full, then you put a heavy plate over it with a heavy, we got a couple of heavy rocks that just kept for that all the time. Put it on top of that plate, and then you cover it with a cloth and let it ferment. And then you have to look at it once in a while. There'll be little moldy spots coming on top of that brine. You just take that moldy spots off. As long as the brine doesn't hurt the brine, you don't leave that mold on there that long. It just gets a little kind of blue spots coming on. Take it off and just leave it in that crock. My mother used to put it where we had our pump house. When we finally did get running water in the house, we had a shed where we had a pump house. And it was cool in there. And Mother would have her crocks of sauerkraut standing in there. And every time we see her going with a certain pan to get sauerkraut, we kids just loved it raw. And we'd run out there and she'd give us all a handful of sauerkraut. I tell you, we had fun in those days. Well, you just take and wash your cucumbers, and you be sure the blossom end is off. You can leave the stem on if you want. That doesn't hurt, but the blossom end has something to do with the brine, so you be sure to take that little yellow blossom end off. And then just put them in a crock and put your brine on them. It's salt and dill, and you boil that up and you pour that on those pickles. And when your crock is full or half full or whatever, just you do the same thing like you do with your sauerkraut. You put something that holds the pickles down underneath the brine, so they come up above, they're going to get soft. Well, that's very easy. When we'd butcher, we'd take the tallow from the cow and put it in a big black kettle, hung it outside. We'd have what did they call them? A jack horse or something, and we have 2 of them. And they'd put a rod across and hang this big black. You've seen those big black cooking kettles. It had a big handle over it. They'd hang that on there. We'd build a fire underneath it, throw that tallow in there. It was so many pounds of tallow, so many pounds of lye or whatever it was, and you'd cook it until it would start to string like syrup. Sometimes it would take a long time, and you had to watch it because when that tallow would get hot and that lye in there, it would want to cook over. Then you have to throw a little more cold water. You see, you mix water with it too. Then you have to hurry up and have a bucket of cold water there to cool it down pull the coals away a little bit. It's too hot. Sometimes it takes 3 hours to cook a kettle of soap. And then in the morning, you could take it and put what did it be? Newspapers. They didn't have plastic very much in those days yet. But I know later years we had plastic we put down there. But they put newspaper, and then you tip your kettle over there, and it would tumble down onto that. Then you let it lay there for a while, covered over so it didn't get dusty or dirty. And when it would dry out enough, then you could go in there with a big old saw or a knife and cut it into bars. And then let it lay out, and it would just dry and be real hard. I still have some homemade soap here. Mine's getting so low, and I got tallow yet, and I just love to make a kettle of soap. She was born and raised in Wisconsin, and there it would get so cold at night that they could hang their fresh meat outside and it would stay frozen for the winter. But here we had to do something else with it because we didn't have winters like that. So she would take the beef and cut it like steaks, and we'd fry it and put it down in a crock, and then the tallow that they'd render, pour it over top of that meat. So we had steak any time. And in the same way with like the sausage we had today, they made their own sausage. I still got a mill here to make my own yet, but I don't. and she would fry that and either put it in 2-quart jars and can it, or put it down in a crock and render lard and cover it with lard. It wouldn't spoil, it would stay good that way, but you had to keep it covered. We never had walnuts. We had maple trees in our yard, and then someone said, you know, walnuts grow here in Oregon. Why don't you put some walnuts in? So my dad took those maple trees out, and he put in 6 walnut trees, and we had walnuts then. It's just that people didn't know that yet. And filberts came later, because we never did have filberts on our place at home. We'd go out and pick up the wild hazelnuts. Now they call filberts hazelnuts, you know. And we would go out and get those wild hazelnuts. You know, when we moved down here, we built this house in 1950. And Mary Jo was just a little girl. And a fellow come here, and it was a new house, so he didn't see any garbage can around here. So he said, would you like, your parents here, would they like garbage disposal? Would they like us to haul up their garbage? Mary Jo said, we don't have any garbage. He says, what do you do with your garbage? She says, we don't have any. She's just a little kid. And he said, well, what do you do with your potato peelings and your tin cans? And she said, well, we feed it all to the cows and the chickens. And I laughed when she told me that. I wonder what that man thought. The tin cans, we don't have tin cans, because I worked in the cannery at one time. And I see what goes in those cans. I don't use recipes. I didn't use no recipe for my bread. I didn't use recipes for anything. I've got so many recipes, and it takes too long to go look them up. I just go ahead and fix something. We did go out and pick berries, see, and we went out, and Dad would take us out, and we'd go pick hazelnuts, and we'd go out and pick wild blackberries, and Mother would make jams and pies and can, and we used to 2-quart jars of them, you know. With the 14 of us, well, we weren't all big at that time, but then the older ones, and Mother just loved to go out. That was an outing for her, to get out of the house and get out in the woods somewhere and pick these wild blackberries. We had a lot of, I know she canned 2-quart jars. And so the other day I went to my garden. Of course, I watered the garden, it was damp, and here there was a big old slug about this long. And I thought, oh gosh, there's slugs here already, and it's this summertime. They usually come later on. Well, he was going into my garden. He was going to help himself to something. I don't know what he wanted, but I decided, you're not going there, mister. So I had a hoe in my hand, and I chopped him in half. Now, they say to plant your cabbage plants and your broccoli and your cauliflower and Brussels sprouts after July. And then these butterflies that go around and lay the eggs on them and you get those green worms on, they will never ruin this. By the time these get big enough to start forming cabbage and the different things, those butterflies are gone. And so I've had cabbage to last me all through the winter. And I've had, I didn't leave it outside because it would freeze, but broccoli, that didn't freeze. It had to be a pretty hard frost to get that. And I had broccoli all through, fresh broccoli all through the winter. Go out and get broccoli. And that Swiss chard is another thing. sometimes I get kind of mad. I went to St. Vincent de Paul one day and I had extra eggs, so I had a couple dozen eggs, and I had some stuff out of the garden. And there was a lady with a real nice car. She was smoking a cigarette. She had nice, expensive toys laying all through that car. And she got 2 baskets full of food, 2 boxes full of food out of there. And I thought, how come that she can smoke those cigarettes and then come and get that food? I'd like to help people that don't have it. But there's a reason a lot of them don't want to work. They like these handouts. But you can't judge them. So, but if she said something to me, I don't think I'd have talked very nice to her. I wouldn't have been so sociable because I thought she had no business there.